Food. Oh my goodness, I love Salvadorian food. It is all greasy, and so it's kind of a given for most missionaries. If they're not used to eating greasy food, they will gain weight. That was in my case as well. Their most common dish and what they're most known for is called pupusas. And pupusas is basically you take corn flour, and you make a dough out of it, and you put cheese in it. That's the basic pupusa. You put cheese in it, and you put it on a pan. And if you want to mix it up, and there's lots and lots of kinds. You can put in beans. They put in something called, they do revueltas, and so that's beans with pig. Although missionaries, we weren't allowed to eat pork, so you just see it from a distance. But they also do crazy ones where they'll put carrots in it. They'll put, so there's a garlic one where they mix garlic with cheese. They will do jalapenos. They'll do shrimp. And so there's just this crazy variety of pupusas that are all so good. I love pupusas. So pupusas are really great. And that's, you're going to find pupuserias where they make pupusas like on every corner. Everybody makes pupusas down there because it's how they make their living. And so, like, it doesn't matter where you are, you're going to find a pupuseria. And you're going to eat pupusas. There's no way you're going to get through without eating pupusas. And definitely if you're in the towns like I was, you're going to make pupusas at least a few times. They also have el plato típico. So that's like normally, so for breakfast, a typical meal that they would have for breakfast is beans, but it's liquefied with a cream. And it's a cream that's very difficult to find, but it's really good. It's Salvadorian cream. And then they'll do fried plantains, kind of like bananas, and they'll do scrambled eggs. But it's not typical scrambled eggs. It's like with tomatoes and onions and all that stuff, all mixed around. And then if they want to get fancy, they'll do a type of cheese that's white, and then they will have it with tortillas, which is another thing, is their tortillas are really thick. They're probably about like that thick. And they're about this round. And so that's their tortillas. It's not typical. And if they're not eating it with tortillas, they'll eat it with rolls, basically. They call it pan francés. There's really, really good rolls. So that's a typical breakfast. If it's not a typical breakfast, you just take out the eggs and it's the same thing, and that's dinner. But it's so good. I love it. They also have street food. And it's honestly really difficult to avoid street food because that's the only food you're going to find unless you want to go to a fancy restaurant. So they do French fries. It's a really common thing down there. They do French fries, and they put cheese on it, and they put the ketchup on it and mayonnaise, and you just eat it out of the bowl like that. They also do yuca, which is a type of root, and they'll fry that, and you put in it salsa with, it's kind of like cabbage and cucumber and all that stuff shredded up. Although as missionaries, we can't eat that, so we just ate it with the salsa. And then there's another one. It's really, really good. It's called pastelitos. So it's just like they have some kind of dough. I believe it's corn dough. And they'll put meat in it, or they'll put potatoes in it. They'll roll it up in a ball, and they'll just fry it. And then you do the same thing, salsa and the shredded vegetables. And, well, I've only tried it with the salsa, but I absolutely love pastelitos. So it's really, really good. Crazy foods, you can find them, but they're not typical. Sometimes they eat iguana down there. I never did. I never had anyone make iguana. It's more expensive, and so you're not really going to see that, but they'll do it. If you go to a fancy restaurant, you might find it, certain ones. And then sometimes they eat possum. But again, I never ate possum, so it's just like something that I heard people would eat. For food stories, I guess the funniest thing is that before my mission, I hated bananas. I absolutely hated bananas. But when I ate a small banana, so it's called a guineo, so it's like a banana, but it's like smaller, I loved it. And it might have been because it was just fresher, but I loved it. And ever since, I have just loved bananas. And speaking of that, there's lots of fruits. You're going to find pineapple, you're going to find mango. Just that there's actually a season, I guess you could call it something about the weather, because there's falling mango everywhere. Every turn you're going to make, unless you're in the city, there's a mango tree. And so when mango season hits, which is about May, I believe it starts, and they eat most of these things, they'll eat it green or they'll eat it ripe, or the in-between. They will just eat fruit however it is. But you'll have mango trees that just fall, and you'll actually walk past them. They're just fermenting in the street. Like, it's just ridiculous how many mangoes there are. And then you're going to have a lot of crazy fruit that you've probably never ever seen in your life. There's zapote, there's guindas, there is maracuyá, marañón. Marañón is the fruit that comes from a cashew tree. So you have the fruit, and then you have the cashew, so there's actually a fruit that they eat. Although not everybody really likes the fruit. I do. And you're going to find star fruit down there as well. It's just a plethora of fruit, and it's amazing.
So about the food in El Salvador, it mainly consists of almost every meal of beans and rice, usually. And if not beans, or if not rice, then definitely beans. And so, get used to that. That's definitely like something that you will eat a lot of. And I didn't have any problem with beans and rice before, but it grew on me. It definitely did. I enjoyed it a lot. And the food there it's a little bit different. There are some dishes that are really common to El Salvador. I mentioned the pupusas, and that was one thing. Well, I guess I should probably first mention that the culture in El Salvador is, in contrast to our culture, we have breakfast and lunch, and usually dinner is I guess you could say the big meal. I guess it's a little more, larger. Sometimes it's more fancy or something like that. Well, in El Salvador, the big thing is lunch. Lunch is usually their fancy meal where, they usually have more food or meats, stuff like that. And whereas dinner is kind of more like along the lines of breakfast. So you have breakfast, and then they have like the dinner, which are fairly closely related as far as types of food go. And so oftentimes one of my favorite breakfast foods to eat would be plátanos fritos, which are fried plantains. And I think that's a common thing in Central America. We would often they'd just be plantains. If you don't know, plantains are just like in the banana family, but they're a lot larger and pretty sweet. And they would fry them up and serve them with beans. Usually it's a very... they usually put beans in a blender for a moment, so they're kind of like liquefied a little bit, but still, so they're like a little runny. And then with cream, that was a very common thing. And sometimes with maybe like a poached egg or something like that. And I have to say that was my favorite breakfast meal, right next to the pupusas. Were my favorite breakfast meal, and I'll get to the pupusas. But this meal was really great. And one thing about El Salvador also is that there's always something accommodating the meal. And when I say that, I mean it's either bread or tortillas. That's one thing that's interesting. And the tortillas there are about, this big around, and they're pretty thick. They're thick tortillas. And usually they're used, you eat them along with the meal, and you use it to, scoop up the rice into your utensils, or to sop up any food or anything like that. That's a very common thing. And if there aren't tortillas, usually a lot of people won't eat. It's very interesting. It's just and the tortillas, where are they? Or the bread. I usually like to have bread with this specific meal of the plantains. And so you'd have the bread in one hand, you'd have your fork in the other, and you'd, use it to help scoop up, beans or rice or whatever onto your fork, and then you'd sop up some of the beans and eat it. And that was my favorite. I loved that meal. I'd often have that for breakfast and for dinner. I thought that was great. And let's see, another meal. Well, I should definitely mention the pupusas, and that was very common. That was more common for breakfast and dinner. Usually lunch, a lot of the pupuserias is what they call them, the pupusa stores, they would close during lunchtime, because that was a weird thing to have pupusas at lunchtime, because it was seen as like a more casual type of meal. And they're basically these stuffed tortillas, filled with the beans and everything like that. I mentioned those. And you can put, my favorite, what they did, they mixed up this chicken, and they put, I don't know exactly what they put in there, but they put other types of vegetables maybe in there, and they'd stuff them and, make the pupusas, fry them up, and you would eat them. You'd eat them with your hands, with your fingers, and you would have to cover them with this salsa, and you just go at it with your fingers. And if you were to eat a pupusa with a fork and knife, everyone would look at you like you were crazy. And so that was interesting. That was fun. Just eating, these pupusas with your hands. And you would just eat. Some people, I know some missionaries, I think the common thing to eat pupusas, I think they would eat around maybe 4. 4 is a decent number to fill you up, but there were some missionaries that could eat, 8 to 10. Which was, I never got to that number. I was, I couldn't make that. But that was one common thing, and you just eat them. And I often, you just get kind of like wrinkly fingers. At least I would, because that would happen to me a lot. I'd be licking my fingers a lot and everything. And so that was definitely a fun thing to eat. Were the pupusas, and they're delicious. A lot of people make them, and so you can definitely try out different types, different kinds. I recommend that you just try out everything and just see what you like. But the pupusas there are really good. It's something that you would enjoy. And as far as lunch goes, we actually would pay usually one of the members, and it's a very common thing, and the members would help out. We would just pay the members like a certain amount every week, and they would buy and cook your lunch for you. So we would do that, and they would often, a very common food is just chicken with beans and rice. That was very common, whether it be just fried or just cooked chicken just on the skillet or whatever. And I would eat chicken all the time, and tastes great. It really does. I'm actually not that much of a picky eater, and so I would eat a lot of that. And I guess there was one time maybe when I got tired of it, I was just like, oh, chicken again, but it was still delicious, and that was a good meal to eat, would be the chicken with the rice and beans. So get used to that. That's very common. And one meal that I really didn't like, I'm not a picky eater. I mean, I guess I would eat it, but I didn't like it, was that they would have fried fish. And I'm kind of particular on fish as far as, my taste goes, but this is a little different in that they would get the entire fish, and they would, take out, just like the major organs, but they would get the entire fish, and they would fry the entire fish, and then they would slap it on your plate with some rice, and you just see just like this fish that had been fried, and you just be looking at it. It still had the outer skin on it and everything, and that was something that I didn't particularly love. And out of courtesy, I would of course eat it, and somehow once it came up that I didn't like the fish, and one of the person that was our cook, she would make it every once in a while, and she looked at me and she was like, well, why didn't you tell me? And I was like, I don't know, I didn't want to hurt your feelings or anything. And she's like, oh, it's not it's not my money. It's not any waste to me. I don't care. And so I was just like, oh, okay. So I learned that. That was something that I learned, but it would be interesting because you'd like open it up and start eating the fish, and they would leave some organs in there. I remember there, I wanted to try it. I got the eyeball out of the fish, and I tried the eyeball, and it wasn't all that great, but it's definitely something that I recommend. Something that's new and different. I recommend that you try just whatever, even though it might seem disgusting. Would be just to just try it. And another dish that I didn't like was liver. I mean, it's not exclusive to El Salvador, but I had first tried it when I was there. Would be liver, and I had a hard time swallowing that one. It was just like your basic cow liver, and so I guess that's not all that unique. But those were the only ones that I didn't really like. But everything else I really enjoyed. I thought were really good. And those were, I guess, the general meals. And as I mentioned before, a lot of people would sell stuff in the streets, and oftentimes it would include food, like different types of food, maybe snack foods. And some snack foods, one of my favorite was what's called the yuca root. And they would fry it. It's a root. Basically, it's very close to the potato, I think. And they would chop it up, and they would fry it. So like these little pieces. Usually they're about that round, and they would fry them up, and then they would serve them with the salsa. And usually, if you bought yuca on the streets, they would put it in a bag for you and tie the top of the bag. They pour the salsa in with the fried yuca, and they tie the top of the bag. And usually, you just bite off the end, like the corner end of one of the bags, and you just eat it straight from the bag, like kind of like squeeze it out, kind of a little bit like toothpaste. It sounds kind of gross, but it's actually really good, and because it just tastes like, I guess the closest thing would be like fried potatoes with just kind of like a tomato sauce with some spices, and it was delicious. Like we would get it all the time, just be chowing down. Like if you got hungry maybe a little bit while you were out there, you could definitely eat that. That was really good. That was something that was really delicious that I like to eat. They also would get the same. They would get the plantains, and they would slice them down the just long ways like this, and they would fry them. So they turn into like chips. Plantain chips. I think that's pretty common. And they would serve them with what they called chile. And I was thinking when I first saw it, it's like really red sauce, and they pour it on there. And I was thinking it was going to be really, really spicy, but Salvadoreños, they don't like spicy foods at all. Like it's something that it's just not common. Like I would rarely, if at all, come across anything really spicy. So that's like kind of like how their taste. They usually prefer very sour. So like they would always get lime, and especially with these plantain chips, they'd get that sauce. They'd get the chile sauce, and then they put lime, and they'd squeeze some limes in there, and you'd kind of like mix it around. It's still in the bag, the plastic bag, and then you could munch on those. Those were very delicious. Those were something that I really enjoyed. Another fruit that was one of my favorites was that I miss very much was what they call talpas. And they're these little green, they look like grapes, but they have like a thicker shell around them. It's just these little green fruits, and you can usually, like, just to open it, you just kind of like bite, and it like breaks it, and you can pop it open. And inside is just like this, just a fruit, and you can pop that into your mouth. And you just kind of gnaw on it around like the seed. And so the seed's fairly big, and so you can just like kind of suck on it and everything like that and just spit out the seed. They were very sweet usually. Those were very delicious. I loved just to chow on those, would be just those talpas. And it was interesting because in, let's see, I believe in Santa Ana, I don't know if I might have those mixed up, but in Santa Ana they would call them talpas. And in Sonsonate, they would call them mamones. And so, and it just interesting to see just like the difference in what they call them. Like even though they were so close, they'd call that, because like I would say, oh, I'd want, like if I was in Sonsonate, I'd be like, oh, I want some talpas. And they'd be like, what? Don't you mean mamones? And oh yeah, mamones. Yeah, you know. So that was interesting, and they're a delicious fruit. And they also had what were called lichas, which were a little bit bigger. Same basic idea, a little bit bigger, but they had like these long, I guess you could say, spikes. I mean, they weren't sharp, but just like these spikes growing out of them. They were red, and you could open them the same way and pop them open. And these, I think, were really common. Like, they tasted a lot like coconut. They'd have the same seed and everything like that, but you can pop them in your mouth and they taste a lot like just coconut. Like if you were to scoop, a coconut, some of the coconut meat or whatever, and eat that. And those were really good. Not as common, I don't think, but those were delicious. And speaking of the coconuts, there were coconuts all over the place. Really delicious coconuts. Oftentimes you could just buy a coconut and they would just get their machete and they'd chop it open, make a little opening for you, and then you could just drink right from the coconut. And that was good. My favorite was when it was chilled, when they were kind of cool. They were cold, and they would often be cold straight from the coconut, and you can just drink the coconut milk. And once you were done drinking it, sometimes they would chop it in half for you, and then you could just scoop out with a spoon. You can scoop out the actual fruit from it and eat it. And at first I didn't particularly love it. I was like, it didn't really have any flavor, but every once in a while they sometimes would put a little bit of sugar in there to sweeten it. But it was really good, and it was very satisfying. That was one thing. Just they had coconuts all over the place, and you can definitely tell because they would just bring truckloads of just full of coconuts, and you could eat those all the time. They were always available. People would sell them a lot, and so those were, I think, some major foods of El Salvador that I particularly remember. I really enjoyed. Just tons of different fruit. I mean, there's some other fruits that I could go on for a long time about, like just different types of fruit, but you come across something, you can definitely give it a shot and see if you like it. But usually the fruit in general, I think, was sweeter. Like, I mean, they had, of course they had like watermelon and things like that. And you just bite into it and it'd be very sweet. And I think it's just because, it was very fertile, easy to grow there, and just a lot sweeter. When I came back here, I was a little disappointed. I bit into a banana. It wasn't as sweet, it was a little disappointing, but that was one thing. It was a very sweet fruit that they had down there that I particularly enjoyed, was just like how sweet it was. One thing that was really common though, or actually I should say that wasn't common, was apples. And so apples kind of grow in cooler climates, and if you wanted to buy some at the supermarket, they'd be actually pretty pricey because they were difficult, to bring in and stuff like that. And so I thought that was interesting. Like, people would, they'd be asking me, they'd say, so do apples grow where you're from? And I'd be like, oh yeah, I actually grew up having an apple tree in my backyard. And they just, wow, they'd be very impressed. They'd want apples, and apples were a rare thing to come by. Just kind of like how, those kind of tropical fruits are not as common here. And so that was definitely interesting, and just to see just apples. And they mostly grew kind of in the higher mountains, usually in Guatemala. And so that was one cool thing. And I did miss apples. I mean, I had one every once in a while, but those were difficult to come by. So yeah, but that's the food of El Salvador. I mean, you might come across some other things that were a little bit different. I guess I should definitely mention one of my favorite dessert type foods. This was really delicious. And in El Salvador, it's very common to fry things. You eat a lot of fried foods in El Salvador, so you can definitely get used to that. They really enjoy frying stuff, and they have what's called empanadas, and that's a fairly common thing in Latin American culture, I think, are empanadas. And I think they vary across different countries, but the empanadas in El Salvador were fairly small, and what they would do would be they would mash up plantains, and they'd mash up and they make like this kind of like dough out of it, kind of, not really a dough, but this kind of like paste, I guess you could say. And then they would separately they would make kind of like a vanilla. Usually it was vanilla cream with a little bit of cinnamon, and they'd get actual cinnamon sticks and stick them in there and mix them in. So they'd make that separately, and so they would get the plantain paste kind of stuff, and they'd use their hands. They use their hands the same way they would make pupusas. So they dig a hole in it, make it a little flat, dig a hole in it, and then they'd scoop up a spoonful of this and plop it in, and then seal it up and make it into like this little ball, this little nugget thing, and then just fry it. And then they'd put sugar on it, and then you'd eat it, and it was very delicious. Biting into that, you taste the banana or the plantain, and then you taste this the vanilla. They just called it cream, but it was almost like a little bit like pudding, I would say, like vanilla pudding, and then there'd be like little bits of cinnamon in there. Very delicious. One of my favorite desserts. I'd get that all the time, and so that'd be delicious. That's one of the desserts there. So I guess that's like the food of El Salvador. That's what you can expect.
Oh man, there's so much to talk about food. And it's kind of crazy because in El Salvador, there are so many differences. So there's a ton of differences in any Latin American country. So like in Central America and South America and Mexico, between like the words. One word in El Salvador means a completely different thing in Honduras, and it means a completely different thing in Costa Rica. And so that was always kind of fun because you'd go to like a different place, and I remember, in El Salvador, at every meal they eat tortillas that are like this. They're corn tortillas, and they're just like this big, and they're like that thick, and it's just like of corn flour. And I kind of was wondering why that they would like always eat these, and it's just because I think they get so many carbs from it that the work that they do there, the majority of the Salvadorian people, is like manual labor. Everyone there walks around with a machete on their hip. So that was kind of scary when I first got there. And then aside from that, we haven't really addressed this, but like there's a ton of gangs. I mean, the gang problem there is unreal, and so we can talk about that later. But in front of a lot of stores, any bank, any utility, water, electricity, and just in front of almost every single store, there is an armed security guard with like a sawed-off shotgun or like a machine gun, and then there's soldiers constantly patrolling the streets, right? So that was kind of a little tangent, but their work is really hard. So a lot of their food is just like high caloric intake. Like they just try and get as many calories as they can so they can keep working. A lot of them work in the coffee fields, which is just grueling. We would go out and help them every once in a while. That is tough work. And these guys make a living out of it. They do it from sun up to sundown. And they just get paid like $3 a day, which is horrible because they use American currency down there. They used to have the colon. That was their currency. But a couple years back, they switched to the dollar, which kind of had a lot of negative side effects for their economy because they used to be able to buy everything and have a lot. They used to just be very comfortable. They could, almost anyone could have all the food that they wanted. But once they switched to the dollar, the people selling still sold in the amount that they sold in the cologne. But now it was the dollar, and they were only getting paid $4 when they were getting paid like 50 colognes each day. So all of a sudden, no one has any money for anything. So okay, that was kind of crazy. Another side tangent, but they've got these things called pupusas down in El Salvador, and they are delicious. I mean, it's the same concept as that tortilla. And I learned how to make them. So we'd be contacting and see a lady making tortillas, and I'd be like, "Hey, let me help you," and just run over there, and she's just shocked because some white boy's like, "Who is this kid?" And I run over there, and I'm making tortillas with her and just talking with her about the gospel, which is so fun. But the pupusas are like, you make a tortilla, you like kind of like beat the dough down into like a little saucer, and then you like make a cup with your hand. You kind of punch it so the dough's like this, and then you put like beans and cheese and like chicken inside, and then you close it up and you flatten it out again, and then you put it on the little saucer. They call them comals, like this big kind of like frying pan dish to cook, and they were the most delicious things ever. Towards the end of my mission, I would eat like 3 in the morning and like 5 at night. I ate so many pupusas because they are so, so, so good. And they make pupusas like shrimp pupusas, bacon pupusas, garlic pupusas. Like, they make pupusas out of anything you can think of. So it was awesome. Like, the main ones are like bean and cheese. They do one that's called loroco, which is like this herb thing that they sell down there, or have down there. I'm sure that we have it here. I just don't know what it's called in English. And then they do like chicken. And then the most famous ones down there are chicharrón, which is like pork. But we couldn't eat pork down there because it had a lot of parasites. Because it was just raised like drinking water from the nasty gutter and eating trash and stuff. So, you know, they would always talk about this one parasite that the pork, like the pig, carried, which was like a parasitic worm that would like go into your brain, and it would like eat parts of your brain, and then like, you know, eat like the back of like someone's eye, and they would like constantly have a headache. So it was like a real thing, these worms, and it was crazy. So I stayed away from pork, but we had a lot of rules for food. Like, we had to always drink purified water, which is common in a lot of countries, but we couldn't eat like lettuce, anything that they had to wash with water. We couldn't eat a lot of fruit because there were a lot of pores, so it was hard to clean them well. We could if we like soaked them in water with bleach in it, but I was never like, when I got home at night, I was exhausted. And I was like, the only thing I wanted to do was take the numbers for the day and then like plan, study a little bit, and go to bed. Like, I was not going to eat, right? Or take the time to soak fruit in bleach water. I was like, that's going to take forever. So when I first got there, my companion, he was a native. So like, natives oftentimes were, as far as the food rules go, they were not super obedient in like my experience. Because they were like, I've been eating this like forever. It's like, I've always eaten chicharrón. Like, I don't, like, who's not going to eat that? So they'd like eat whatever. And so we'd go over to investigators' houses, my first area, and they're like, oh, we made a salad. And I like, and they go over the health rules the very first day, but you're in shock. You know, you have no idea what's going on, so you don't remember everything. But I was like, I think I remember something about lettuce, but like, I'm not sure if we can't eat it, or like if I'm supposed to wash it well. I don't remember. So they give me this salad, and I look at my companion. He's like, oh yeah. So I'm just like chowing down. He would always drink tap water because like that's what he grew up drinking. He didn't drink filtered water. So I'm just drinking tap water. And by the end of my first change, I had like amoebas and parasites, and so I just was having a rough time, right? And you know, not to be vulgar in any way, but it was, anything that went in just came right out. I could not keep any food down at all, well, in my body, because either the parasites would just tear through it in my stomach, or the amoebas were just making my intestines and my like system just go crazy. So it was crazy. Like, it was a really fun way to start the mission, just because it was like, I'm already sick. Like, this is crazy. This is awesome. And I'd like meet my buddies at district meeting, because one of my mission MTC companions was in my first district. So we'd like get together and I'd be like, dude, I'm like so sick. And he's like, I am too. I was like, it's so cool. I was like, this is the mission. Like, this is what everyone would talk about. And so other than that, I mean, they have, the food there is really simple. They have some things that some people make really, really like complicated, I guess, or like really delicate food. I don't know how you say that, but just like they like cuisine, I guess they sometimes can make. But most of the time, every morning we'd eat like beans, and they liquefy their beans. So they put all their beans in a blender and just liquefy it up. So we eat liquefied beans with rice, and then like this cream. They've got this cream down there that everyone's like, oh yeah, it's like sour cream, but it's like 3,000 times better, and it's like not super sour like sour cream. So it's just this like super special cream that they eat, and they mix it with everything, and then they always eat plátanos fritos, like fried bananas, fried plantains, because like there are just fruit trees everywhere. And there's huge banana trees and huge mango trees and huge like avocado trees, and there's a ton of other fruit names that I don't know, like jocotes and mamones, and they have all these different fruits that, because the soil is so fertile, they just grow. Like, people will eat a mango, throw the seed, and in like a year or two, there's like a massive mango tree. And that's like not even a joke. They have these humongous trees, and they have fruit trees that grow so quickly because the soil is so fertile. So it's like, it's super cool. It's awesome. So we'd just be walking, and like a mango would fall off of a random like mango tree. You just pick it up and eat it. Or like, you'd be like teaching investigators or street contacting, and they'd just be like, "Have you guys eaten today?" We're like, "No." They're like, "Well, here's like a bunch of mangoes," and they just give you a bag full of like enormous mangoes or avocados, and you just eat them the rest of the day as you're walking around, or you wait till you get home. Or, I mean, they just have so much fruit down there. So, you know, breakfast we'd eat like beans and rice, and like fried bananas, and that was just delicious. But in the afternoon, we'd usually eat something similar. Like, there was always almost rice, and there was always almost beans or like fried bananas. But there was always some kind of meat. They eat lots of meat, specifically chicken. There's like a saying down there. I don't know if it translates like perfectly, but it's, "A house without chickens or chicks is without grace in God's eyes." And it was like, whoa. It's like, that's kind of weird, but it's just every house has chickens. They all have chickens because they wait for the chickens to lay eggs. So there's other chickens and little chicks running around, and then they kill the chickens and eat them. So they always have chickens, and there's always chicken. Like, they make tons of chicken soup with like the whole chicken in there. So you'll get like a chicken leg or like the head and like the eyes, or like, it's just crazy. They eat tons of fish as well. And they like leave the eyes in, so you're like poking out the eyes and eating them, and like you just like pick all like the meat you can off of it, and like they don't take any of the bones out. Like, they like don't really like gut them either. Like, you just kind of like eat the fish as is, which is like cool. It was awesome. They have some really cool desserts. One's called a buñuelo, which is like the most delicious thing ever. It's yuca. So yuca is like a root that they would eat, which is like delicious. So, you know, the street vendors have these bags, and they put yuca in them, and they like shake them up with salsa, and that's like one of the really common ways to eat them. But in this one area of my mission, they had what was called buñuelos, which in another part of the country meant something completely different. So it was kind of funny. But these buñuelos they would like smash up the yuca, and then they would fry it, like deep fry it into these balls, and then like these yuca balls, and then they would put them in bags and add this like syrup juice thing that was red, that it was the most delicious thing. I think I gained like 15 pounds in that area just eating buñuelos. They were so delicious. I would just like be walking around, like someone would slam the door in our face, and I'd be like, "You know what? We need to pick me up. Let's go get buñuelos." So we'd go get buñuelos. And, oh, they were delicious. They were so good. So they eat like, they've got some really, really good desserts. They always do what's that called? The arroz con leche, rice and milk. So they do the rice milk thing, which is delicious. And they'll make like rice pudding every once in a while. Not a ton. Something they do that's kind of funny, I always thought was funny, was like on holidays, they'll eat like chicken sandwiches. That's what they eat. They call them panes con pollo. And you're like, okay, it's like a chicken sandwich. And so they'll make these huge subs, and they'll just load them with chicken. And sometimes they'll even throw turkey in there. So you're just like, what? It's like not really a chicken sandwich. They'll throw turkey in there, and then they just put tons of lettuce on it, and like tons of radishes and tons of carrots. So this thing is just this massive sub. I mean, it puts Subway and Blimpies and everything to shame. And then they douse it in this like chicken gravy thing that they make. And it is the most delicious thing in the world. You know, when I first heard it, I was like, okay, well, for Christmas we're gonna eat chicken sandwiches. Like, okay, cool. But like, oh my gosh, it was delicious. They're so good. And as a missionary, as in the States. I'm sure we ate a little bit less than the States missionaries, but we would be like running around because people wanted to give us dinner appointments on holidays, and you're meeting with like families that you're teaching. By the end of it, you're just about to explode. And these things are so big, and everyone does them. Everyone does panes con pollo. I think the craziest thing I ate was my first Christmas. Not craziest. I had some pretty crazy stuff. But one of the coolest things that I ate was like my first Christmas was only 5 days into the mission field because I got out there on December 20th. And I remember we ate duck. We ate like fried duck, and like we ate like the duck tongue and like the duck feet and stuff. Duck feet were like the weirdest, rubberiest thing, and the duck tongue was like really squishy. But the duck itself was delicious. So good. Way, way, way good. And they eat a lot of like, they'll do like stuffed peppers. You'll eat stuffed peppers a lot, which are really good, and they're like breaded. Or they'll eat like breaded chicken. And they do eat beef every once in a while, but it's not as much as the other stuff. They've got stuff that like people know of like from Mexico. They have empanadas, and they have like quesadillas, and they have like other stuff like that. But they all have different meanings. Like an empanada is kind of the same as a Mexican one, but a tamale completely different. It's like it's kind of like the same form, but it's mostly just like liquefied corn flour that they like put and wrap in like banana leaves and then put and like set them to cook. And it's like, oh, they're kind of gross. They were just like always like really squishy, and like, oh, I did not like them at first. By the end of my mission, I got to like them, especially when they would do one. They called it a ticuco, and it was like a tamale but with just beans inside. So it was like a little bit of that corn flour stuff, but just like beans and like mixed with chicken on the inside, and it was delicious. And they would do, they would make, so a quesadilla is just sweetbread. It's like, it's kind of like cornbread here for us, but like sweeter. So it's like kind of that same consistency, but like really, really sweet and just delicious. I mean, when people would make us quesadilla, it was a special occasion. Like, awesome. Loved it. Trying to think of any more foods I ate in El Salvador. I'm sure there's tons of them. We made one called, there's not really a translation. The English translation is like pinches, because they would take a tortilla that they would make and they would like pinch it just so there were like openings in it so you could kind of stuff stuff in it. And then you would like cover that in beans and then put shredded chicken on it that was like cooked. And then you would put like guacamole avocado on top of that. Then you would put cheese on it, and then you would like cover it in like chili sauce, and it was so good. It was like, I only ate those in like one area of mine because they were like, it was harder to make because it was a wealthier area. So in the wealthier area, they had money to make them. That was delicious. But, and like I never served in a place, kind of like I was saying, but I went over there. And they had these things called fry jacks, which were like these big, like deep fried flour tortillas filled with like kind of the same as like a pupusa. It's like chicken and beans and cheese, but it was just like on a massive scale, and it was way more deep fried. Like a pupusa is just like cooked. It was deep fried in like oil and stuff. It was super greasy, but it was delicious. So that's kind of what I remember from like Belize as like the good food. I was only there for a week, but so good. I loved the food. And so this isn't so much about the food, but the people there. I mean, we'd be contacting, and everyone invites you in. Everyone invites you in to either just talk. And I guess not everyone invites you in, because we definitely got the door slammed in our face, like every missionary. But I mean, we would be contacting, and someone would say, you know what, I'm a devout Catholic. I don't really want anything to do with your church, but have you eaten dinner tonight? And we'd be like, no. So like at the end of my mission, I kind of honestly like stopped saying yes, because sometimes you would just like go in there and they'd feed you and you'd like kind of waste time. But at the beginning of my mission, I'd be like, no, like why? And they'd be like, oh, okay, come on in. Then they'd like yell to their little kid, go to the store and get this for the missionaries. We'd be like, what? Like they're members of a different church. And they'd just like make us like beans and rice, and then they'd go and buy like a soda, because every meal they go and either get a Coke or like a Fanta. But as missionaries, we couldn't drink Coca-Cola for some reason, but we could drink like Fanta and other like sodas. So we'd always like have a Fanta there, like orange Fanta. That's like the only Fanta they have, but it's delicious because it's made with like cane sugar or something outside of the States. So it's way better than the Fanta here. I came back and tried it, and I was like, this is disgusting. I don't even like it. But the people there are just super hospitable. Like everyone has no money, but they all try and give you as much as they can, which is super cool. Kind of like the food dynamic. Like there are people everywhere on the streets with like these huge flat, kind of like massive frying pans. Just like hot plates, I guess you could call them. And there's just constantly ladies out there just making tortillas, and people are going and buying them, and so they're just always making tortillas, and people go place an order and be like, hey, I'll be back in 20 minutes, and come with their like little cloths and wrap up their tortillas and go back and have, breakfast. And then they'll do the same for lunch, and they'll do the same for dinner, and the same with pupusas. So there's always people out making food. And that was like kind of cool. I just loved the dynamic of El Salvador because it was like chaotic, like all the time. Like my family, there's 9 of us in my family, so I have 6 brothers and sisters. So there's like always something going on, and so like El Salvador is perfect for me because there's always crazy stuff going on, and there's people everywhere, tons of people to talk to. But it was fun. I liked it.
The majority of Hispanics that I served with were Salvadorian. And so I love Salvadorian food, and oh man, it is so good. The main thing that if you hear about Salvadorian food, you're going to hear pupusas, which all members fed us, and they are so good. I don't know how to describe them. It's like a stuffed tortilla, and it's like fried, and it's so good. So we had pupusas weekly. Sometimes daily. And then there's tortas, which I really love. They're just, I don't know how to describe these delicious foods, but tortas are kind of like sandwiches, but they're better. And so there were like pupuserias everywhere, and torta shops and panaderias. And for Salvadoranian food, a lot of it uses words that you might hear in like Mexican American food, like a quesadilla. But a quesadilla in Salvadoranian food is like a treat. It's like a sweet bread, and it's delicious, but it's nothing like, the words are just kind of mixed up, and like enchiladas and everything. But the Salvadorian food is delicious. All food in California is delicious. It's all like the little hole in the wall places that you want to go to because they're so good, and they've been there for years. Yeah, I really miss the food is one of the things I miss most. It was delicious.
So I guess that's something that I really love about the culture is just how loving everyone is. Literally, these people have nothing. These people live off of the food that they make on a daily basis. I mean, we're talking about people who, families, they earn $5 a week. And in El Salvador, they have U.S. currency, so a lot of the things that you see at the store would be the same price that would be in the U.S. And if you're earning $5 a week, that's nothing. That's nothing. And so a lot of these people lived off of. They didn't really have a whole lot, and that was very humbling. That was very humbling for me. And I guess I just really love the fact that, like, even though these people don't have anything, they're willing to give everything. And there's so many examples I have of these families giving up everything that they have to come to church. We have families that would walk miles and miles up the hill to go to church. They'd be living in a little tin hut without even a roof over their head, and they would still make it to church, they'd still pay their tithing, and so it was just very humbling. I remember there being fireworks, not too many, but they did make a lot of noise during Christmas and during New Year. The New Year. They did eat a lot of panes. Panes are like
the best way I can describe it is like a Subway sandwich, but they put, instead of like vegetables and everything that we put in it, they put like chicken and like this sauce in it, and it's super, super good. But they will give you so much food. I remember getting so full one time I wanted to cry, and it was during Christmas, during the season, and my companion and I had already eaten at this family's house, and we were visiting all these other families, and every single family that we went to see, they all had panes, and they were all like, please eat some, please take some for the road, and we were so full. And they aren't like tiny. When they're like maybe that big, and they're just like, they just stuff them full of chicken and the sauce and everything, and we just got so full. But that's their culture. They just love to share, they love to give, and my biggest advice for that is just eat it. If you can't eat it, like that's fine, you can tell them no, but it is a little bit offensive to them if you don't eat the food that they give you, even though it looked disgusting sometimes, or sometimes I was unsure. Just eat it, because it can be offensive if you don't eat it. So but I never really had a problem with the food. It was kind of strange because they eat a lot of the same things over and over. Their primary food that they eat is pupusas, and I love pupusas. So good. I've gone to so many places here in the States trying to find something of the same quality, and you just can't get pupusas like you can in El Salvador. And for those who don't know, pupusas are just like thick tortillas, and they stuff cheese in it and meat and beans, and sometimes they put sometimes they'll put like little plants in it. I'm trying to think of what loroco, that's what it is, loroco. They put loroco in it, and it's like a little plant that they stick in the pupusa, and oh, it's so good. So good, and it was so cheap there. I miss it so much. My companion and I, if we were running late and like happened to not eat for some reason dinner, which that almost never happened, we would always go and get pupusas, because those were the best. Pupusas are the main dish there. They eat a lot of pupusas. A lot of breakfast meals included eggs, beans, and yeah, I just remember eating a lot of eggs and beans. Oh, and pan francés. They have these people who ride their bikes around, and they have these little like boxes connected to that they tie in front of their bikes, and they would always ring these little bells in the mornings saying that they were selling their bread. They'd be yelling pan francés, and I miss it. It was so good. So we would always eat the pan francés with like the eggs and the beans, and it was good. And let's see what else. They would eat a lot of chicken and rice. So I would say those were the common foods. They would eat chicken, rice, which it wasn't, I mean, they would eat it a lot, but I guess it kind of depends on the situation and the occasion. Pupusas, they eat constantly, doesn't matter what meal. Eggs, beans, and the pan francés, and they eat a lot of mangoes. So good. They also have one of my favorite fruit is called jocote, and it depends on like the different seasons. So in one season the jocote could be green and a little bit bitter, but when it was like super ripe and red, oh, it tasted like candy. So I thrived on jocote. It was so good. There is one situation where this is like when I first got to the mission, they have this fruit, it's called nano, I believe, and it smells like bubble gum, but it's like this green fruit, and this family that we taught, they had a nano tree like outside in their backyard, and one time one fell while we were teaching them, because we were teaching them outside, and one fell, and the dad of the family was like, hey, you should eat this. And I was like already iffy, because I was like, it just fell off the tree, like it's on the ground now. But I was like, okay, it's a fruit, should be good for us. Anyways, the dad like stops us right as we were about to eat the fruit, and he was like, actually, I have some inside. So he went inside and brought some out, and it was cut up, but there was like little tiny bugs crawling all over it. And I remember, and I was, I had just gotten into the mission. I looked at my companion and I was like, I can't eat that. And she had already told me before, like, Hermana, anything that they offer you, you have to eat because it's offensive if you don't. And I remember looking at her and I was like, I can't eat this. And she was like, sister, you have to. And so I just took a deep breath and her and I, we just dug into that fruit, and it was sweet, like it was good fruit, but it was just the fact that it had bugs crawling all over it. But I guess that day we just got some more protein, so it was good. So they don't have like normal grocery stores like we do. I mean, they do have stores in parts that they call El Centro, and it's like the central of whatever the area is that you're in. So we would go to El Centro to buy our groceries on P days, but if we needed like supplies during the week, then they have these little tiendas at the corner. And I want to say like almost every block had a tienda, at least in my first area. Even though we were like in the middle of nowhere, people would just sell, they would sell like chips and toilet paper and hot dogs and hair clips, just random stuff at these tiendas. But I loved going to the tiendas and buying like candy and things like that. That was always fun. And it's interesting because there they have like bars over the window, so it's like not a store that we think of. Tiendas are like, it's almost like a doorway, and they have like bars barricading everything, so it's kind of like their security to keep people out. And we would just walk up and just ask what we wanted, and they would give it to us. It was great. There's other crazy foods. So they also love fish, and they loved fried fish. So literally they're taking the whole fish and they're frying it and they give it to you. So that includes like the skin, the eyes, everything. And one time my companion and I had gone to this house, and the mother was usually always a great cook. Like, we loved going to this family's house, loved them to pieces. But this one night, she gave us this soup, and we asked her what it was, and she was like, oh, it's a surprise, just eat it. And it had fish in it. It had, I want to say it was shrimp, because it looked like shrimp. And then it was like this soup consistency. I don't know what else was in it, but it was so bitter and so cold. It wasn't, like they said it was soup, but it was cold. And we struggled eating that. I can't remember the name of what it was called, but it was like, it had fish in it and some plants in it, and it was interesting. So they do like a lot of seafood. I mean, they have a lot of fish, but that's more like if you're going towards San Salvador. Because I didn't eat a whole ton of fish when I was there. But when we did, it was fried. It was fried, and it was good. I guess something really interesting is that it's already super hot and humid, and for some reason, they would give us soup. But like sometimes it would be really, really hot soup, and it'd be like over 100 degrees and 95% humidity, and they'd be giving us soup. And then that night, we would go to like FHE activities, or we'd go to ward activities, and then they'd be serving arroz con leche. And that's like primary dessert. They love serving hot chocolate. They love serving it. Arroz con leche is like rice pudding, so they love serving that. But it was always hot. And that was kind of, I mean, it just became fun because you were always sweating, always hot, and then you go to these places and they're serving hot meals, so hot soup, hot chocolate, arroz con leche, which was hot. And that was always fun. So I really miss that.